All right. Are we here? All right. Hi, everyone. This is Chris. Haven't been on these Hangouts for a little while. Sorry, I've been busy with other things, but Eva and others have taken care of it. But I wanted to come and talk to you all and talk with you about research projects. And so this is something that I think is one of the most critical aspects of the degree that we offer here, and any degree, any research-oriented degree. So what I want to do in this is go over some of the details about when we talk about research, what that means, what projects look like, go into some of those details, talk about research versus consulting, what good questions are, and then we're going to take a break and where you guys are going to go to your discussion groups, and I want the groups to do something specific, and I'll explain that in a second, but generally I want you guys to talk about potential projects that you're thinking about, and I'll talk about how I want you to do that. And then come back, present those out, and use the chat forum, and then I'm going to take some of them and we'll discuss them. And what I want to do out of this is treat this as an exercise. So we say, okay, this is a good research question. Yeah, this one might not be, or how would I answer that one? So it's just a chance for you to get used to talking about different research topics and how you would approach them, ones that are good, ones that are bad, things like that. And then at the very end, I'm going to ask Dr. Bruce Arnson to come in, and we're going to talk about some of the timelines of when things are done. Because if you're thinking of coming to the blended program, the application process doesn't start till April, but some of the application process will consist of a summary of the research project you intend or you're thinking of conducting. And then there are other steps through that. So that's what I want to do over the course of the next hour. So first, when we talk about research, my opinion is that research is just as important as the classwork that you take to get any master's degree, besides a degree that doesn't have any research component. And the important thing to realize is that research is not the same thing as homework. It's not like big homework. Homework, especially what we've been giving you guys in the graded assignments, the practice problems, the exams, are very tightly controlled for many reasons, because there is no gray area in the stuff that we give you, because it has to be within a tolerance. We have to know exactly what we want to get. So we give you stuff, and you give us the answer. So by now, if you're interested in this program, you've gone through 3 or 4 courses, you're very good at doing that. That will not help you with research. Research is just the opposite, where you go out into the gray area and you come up and bring order to the chaos. So for research, you're trying to create new intellectual property. Now, you're not going to win the Nobel Prize in supply chain management with this, because you're going to have a very limited time, but there are certain aspects that you need to be aware of. You need to think about research-oriented projects instead of just doing another bigger homework problem. The focus, the focus of the research is always to answer a question. And it should be more practically than theoretically oriented for our purposes, because we're not in, physics or advanced maths. We're in a supply chain management program. So the thesis, or the research project rather, will always be practically oriented, but it has to have some theoretical components. And I'll talk more about that in a second. It should apply to any logistics or supply chain topic, and the goal of research is to expand the knowledge base, not just repeat what's been done before, but to expand the knowledge base. That's what we're here for. You should use this your research project to suit your own purposes. Pick a topic that you find interesting, because you'll spend more time than you ever thought you would on this project. I know when I was doing my dissertation and my master's degree, it's probably 3 to 4x amount of time I'd spend on my dissertation versus the coursework. It's that much more, especially when you really want to create something new. We want you to work with a company that interests you. We want you guys to come with some ideas of a project. And you should turn this into something you can use, whether you want to publish it, change your career with it, advance your career, use this research topic. So what is this research project flexible in terms of and not flexible in terms of? But people ask, excuse me, sometimes what's the length of the project? And we really don't care. Or the approach, or is the company involvement exactly what it is. We're pretty flexible on those things. It's not like you have to write 10 pages on something. You have to write enough to answer the question. And so we're not flexible in terms of the specific structure that we'll give you. You need to review what's been done before, and you need to make a contribution. So when you look at research projects, there or any of these kind of larger projects, in my opinion, they fall into three big buckets. The first are modeling type projects. And these are where you develop a mathematical representation of the problem. You use a specific approach to provide insights or recommendations. And we know the approaches you're going to use. It's going to be optimization-based, statistical or econometrical, using regression or simulation or some combination of those, maybe system dynamics. But in SC0x, we've gone through the major buckets of tools that you'll use for modeling approaches. So that's the modeling type research projects. And to me, those are the ones best suited to this program and to the discipline, where you have actual data from a company or organization, you apply some approach to it, and you get insights out of it. That's the first type of research project. The second is more like field work. And this is where you collect a lot of information, you formulate best practices and lessons, you do surveys, interviews, and case studies, and where it's actually understanding kind of a softer side of how things interact. It uses data, but more qualitative data than quantitative data. And these things are harder to create. It seems like it'd be easier to create a project like this, but they're harder to analyze because the techniques for determining what is best or understanding the quality trade-offs are much better defined for mathematical problems or analytical problems than they are for these qualitative problems. But that's another type, these fieldwork type projects. And then there's a conceptual, and this is where you do an extensive review of literature, other data sources, you formulate a synthesis of past ideas, and you kind of come up with a new approach, synthesizing things that have been done in the past. That is the worst type of project for you guys, because it's essentially just regurgitating what's been out there. People have done it, and it can be interesting when done well. It usually takes way more time than people think. So the focus is going to be on the modeling type projects. That's what we want you guys to focus on. And that's what we're going to try to favor when you come in here. We'll try to steer you that way. So the whole idea of what makes a research project successful, the key thing, it has to answer a question. Because every research project starts with a question. You want to answer a question. And you want to make sure that this question has that it can be answered, that you understand how you can answer it, you have the data required to answer it. So some good questions that might be relevant for research. For example, one is, under what conditions does direct store delivery make sense? When should a firm use dedicated versus for-hire transportation assets? How does the cost of a service and the level of service of that process interact? What is the interaction between those? How can the product management process be improved to consider supply chain capabilities? So all of these questions are kind of open-ended. They're kind of saying, how can we do X? Here's some bad questions. A bad research question is, where should my firm locate its distribution centers? That's not a good research question. So it's not open-ended. It's kind of detailed to one specific company. It doesn't really add any value to anyone else. And the other thing is that it's uses an approach is widely used. What supply chain strategy is best for my company? Again, that's not really a research question. That's more of a consulting question. I'll talk about the difference in a second. How does my company compare to others in my industry? Again, that really isn't a research question. It's something specific to a situation. Which software vendor should I select for X? And again, that's not a research question. So to kind of highlight, because I think what people get confused in is what's the difference between research and consulting. So let me give you some highlights. Consulting projects, and we've all done this, and a lot of our graduates go on to work at consultancies. Consulting projects they tend to apply a well-known methodology or approach, so it's well established. They solve all aspects of a problem. They use personnel who performed these types of studies before, so very rarely is it the first time you've done this. And they're expected to come up with complete, specific, and accurate recommendations for that customer, for that firm. Those are consulting projects. Research projects, on the other hand, apply a newer, non-traditional methodology to a problem at hand. You want to do something a little bit different. You don't want to do the same thing over and over again. Research projects focus on solving a representative piece of the problem, not all of the problem, just a representative piece. You use personnel who have not solved this problem in this specific way before. you're all students. You don't want to have your research project be something you've done 16 times in the past. It defeats the purpose. And the outcome of this will usually produce prototypes, guidelines, and proofs of concept. So they're very different things, consulting versus research. Consulting projects look for specific numeric results, while research looks to uncover insights. All of your research projects cover new ideas or ways of thinking, insights. Well, if I'm doing a consulting project, I want to know, for example, exactly what product should be produced in a certain plant. If I'm doing it as a research project, I want to know under what conditions would determine which products to use in which plant. Consulting projects result in production-ready tools that the customer can use. Research projects tend to develop prototypes. They prove a concept. Consulting projects are usually time-sensitive. Anyone who's been a consultant knows this. It has to be done in 3 months, 6 months, whatever. Research projects are typically open-ended in terms of time frame. Consulting projects usually cover all aspects of a problem. If I'm brought in as a consultant to help a company procure its transportation, I have to take care of all of it. I can't ignore pieces of it because they're asking me to solve the whole problem. Research projects, you find the relevant portions and you work on that. The idea is not to be collectively exhaustive. It's to uncover those insights on the portions that are relevant, that are illustrative of the key concepts you're trying to get at. Finally, consulting projects, the results are specific to that firm, so the firm knows exactly what they should do. Research projects, on the other hand, have results that are generalizable and can be applied by other companies, other firms, other individuals. So hopefully this gets you thinking a little bit different about what is consulting and what is research, because they're very different animals. And a lot of times people see them as being similar, but in my mind, they're crystal clear in the differences. And so if you've been going through the MicroMasters extra material for the last 4 courses, you'll see what we try to do each week is put in a couple theses. So hopefully you've gotten some examples of some of the master's theses that have been developed using, and they all come from the same process. What's the research question? How are you going to solve that question? And it follows that approach. So there have been a lot of different projects on all different aspects of supply chain management, transportation, and they all start from the same approach, coming up with a research project. All right, and so what I want to do now is I want you guys to break up into separate rooms, or go into the rooms, and it can be, what, up to 10 in a room? Is that right, Arthur? 8 in a room. And I encourage you to go to rooms that have fewer people in them, right? Spread it out. And what I want you to do is, each person at a time, I want you to spend 30 seconds, that's it, no monologuing for 72 minutes, right? Each person come up and say, here's my research question, here's what I'm thinking of. And we won't hold you to this, but come up and say, I think my research question is, that might be relevant for my company and could be interesting is, for example, how can I use a portfolio of transportation options to better manage my freight? Okay, and then discuss it a little bit. Say, okay, I think that's wrong, I think that's too specific, whatever. So give each other feedback. At the end of it, we'll give about 15 minutes. I want you to come and use the chat form to put up some of your research questions, ones that you think are relevant, and then I'll take and we'll talk about some of them. Eva, myself, and Bruce Arnson will talk about, okay, this one's good, and then we'll talk about how we think we would answer the question, because that's the next step. So I have this research question, so should I use optimization for it? Should I use simulation? Should I use regression? And then specifically, we can go into more detail. So what I want you to do for the next 10, 15 minutes is go off to those separate rooms, present your potential ideas, get feedback, and at the end, post on the chat form suggested ideas or research questions that you might have. And it's like Jeopardy, has to be in the form of a question, because that's the best way to do it. All right, so break off to your rooms. All right, welcome back. Hopefully you had good discussions in your breakout rooms. I'm here with Dr. Bruce Arnson, and we wanted to go through a couple things. First, before we get to your questions and your potential research questions, I wanted Dr. Arnson to go through the rough schedule for the application process and how the research project proposal is a part of that.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. So our application software system is going to open up on April 1st of next year. And so folks will be able to begin working on their application at that time. Then in terms of schedule, the due date is June 15th. So you have to submit your completed online application by June 15th. We will be reviewing those applications, and by August 1st, we will announce the decisions as to who's been admitted and so forth. Those folks who have been admitted will have then until September 1st, 1 month, to think about it, decide to commit. So we have to have your decision back by September 1st. Then the students will, of course, then come to campus on January 8th. But in terms of how the research project plays into this, there'll be a need because you're on campus for a fairly short amount of time. You're going to be on campus for 5 months instead of the 10 months that the residential students are on. There's a need to begin working on your your research project ahead of time. And so even now, you need to start thinking about what would be a good project. When you actually do your application, you'll have to provide a 2-page description of your project, and that will be evaluated in your application. Things like what kind of a research question do you want to approach? What kind of an entity, projects that have a quantitative analysis part to them and have the cooperation of some other entity, a government agency or a company. Those are viewed very favorably. So I'm thinking about not only what the question would be, is what data would you need to do a quantitative analysis, where would you get that data, and so forth. So those are the things we'll be looking for in the application that you'll write up. If you are accepted into the program and decide to come in, there will be some more deadlines that you need to achieve. So, for example, we're going to need to see a much more fuller description of the project, more information about what methodology you intend to pursue, what data you're going to need to get, and evidence that you've been talking to the outside world, to companies, to government agencies, about the possibility of them cooperating with you in a project and the ability to get information. So by December 1st, there'll be another document that you have to provide that covers a lot of those areas. We're really doing this because once you hit the ground at MIT in January, you'll be amazed at how fast it goes, and you'll be graduating in early June before you know it. And so you need to hit the ground running full speed on your research project.
Right. Yeah, so this is almost, so everyone on this call has already gone through SC0x. So you know what the stage gate process is for development of software or any product. Think of this as a stage gate process for your research project. So right now we're in the new ideas coming in, and the gate is very low. We're just going to discuss them. As you go through the application process, April through June, it gets a little more rigorous, and it keeps getting more and more rigorous, and the standard keeps going up until you actually produce your research project. So think of it that way. We'll give you a series of things that are due, and it's mainly, as Bruce said, to make sure that you use the time here wisely, because we've seen too many people float around, not figuring out what they're going to do, and then they pay the price later on. And you guys do not have the luxury of time when you come here in January, graduating in June.
Well, and you'd really like to graduate with the rest of the class.
Yeah, that's always
because if you don't get done, then you have to stay for the summer, and of course MIT will charge you tuition for the summer as well. So you want to make sure you get done to graduate.
There's a lot of incentives and disincentives there. We had a question about what type of thesis should we do in terms, should it be mathematical, can it be qualitative, or should it be both? And of course the answer is both. The important thing is you have an analytical project, all right? And so the best projects that I've seen, whether it's a research project, a thesis, a dissertation, or a detailed report, they combine both. And so you have some kind of qualitative exploration of the context, so you know what the situation is, because there's always interesting factors that need to be considered. But I also think you need a backbone of a mathematical model of some sort that kind of help you justify your results. So I see this as a combination. And the percentage might differ, 80-20, 50-50, 60-40, something like that. But generally, you will need aspects of both for that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So some of you have been putting in some potential research questions, and so now we're going to talk about them and see, we'll debate whether we think they're any good or not. How's that? So someone said, for example, and they're not all coming in as forms of a question. Remember, it's got to be like Jeopardy. It's a research question. One is, what factors that make a container terminal more competitive? And so this could be a good research question. And the real focus would be to identify the factors that can improve the level of service or performance of a container terminal. I can see two potential threads here, and then I'm curious what your thought is, Bruce. One is you go out and you survey, or you talk to dozens or hundreds of potential ports, because there are many in the world, and you do a survey and you do a regression on that, and you kind of tweak out the underlying factors that influence that dependent variable, right? That might be success. You might have different levels of success and different measures of that. So that's one more, that's almost qualitative, where you're kind of doing a survey and then doing a regression model off of that to identify what are the things that are important. Another way to do it is take a micro approach and look at port container operations and create a simulation model. And in that simulation model, you might try different policies. And the different policies that you apply will lead to different results. So I could see two different threads to answering the same question in different ways.
Well, this is an outstanding question, and right now is a wonderful time to ask that question, because with the expansion of the Panama Canal, it has kicked off a competition between ports all around the world. A question like this would be great to either have Singapore ports or Hutchinson working with you, because they have hundreds of ports around the world, and I'm sure they're always looking at the question, what makes one terminal successful and what makes another terminal not successful. And right now, with every terminal trying their hardest to attract the larger ships that go through the canal, this is a really hot topic, actually.
Yeah, the biggest problem that I see for this one is surveying, because you have to find the ports that you want to answer. That's why it's so important you partner with a company who can provide you access. Yeah. The biggest stumbling block I see students have is they're going to run a survey, but they don't know who to send the survey out to. And generally, if you just send a random survey to a bunch of executives, you get garbage back. So that's the challenge.
Yeah, let me make another comment on that in terms of what makes for good projects and what makes for not so good
less good projects.
Yes, less good projects. So a lot of companies, because I spend the summer going around and talking to companies about what projects for our students, and many companies want the students to go do benchmarking, okay? Contact companies and find out best practices, find out who's doing what, and so forth and so on. It turns out, unfortunately, that our students are not very good at that, and not because it's their fault, but, and I found this out through my consulting projects that I did when I had my own company. Junior people cannot get through the barriers to get to the senior person to have that conversation. Unfortunately, you get blocked by the administrative assistant, right? So students don't do a very good job of benchmarking. So when you're thinking about where you're going to collect data, you got to be careful. Don't imagine you're going to call up companies, cold call on the phone, and they're going to put you right through the CEO. It ain't going to happen.
Yeah, that's all. Unless you know the CEO.
Yeah.
Okay, another question that came up, research question is, how do I measure the impact of centralization or decentralization in the supply chain function in the blank industry, cement, petrochemical, you name the industry? So two things here. One, we've done theses in the past that have looked at this. We did one in the semiconductor industry, did a project with Intel. And this was a hard one because it turned into almost an opinion piece. Oh, I think centralization is good because blah, 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 decentralization for this. It was hard to find a method where you could actually critique which was the better approach. What they ended up doing was showing under what conditions it made for a certain function to be centralized or decentralized. But again, at the end of the day, it wasn't that satisfying because a lot of it turned into anecdotes or common sense. Centralized strategic planning should be centralized, operations decentralized. It wasn't that great because it's hard to find the methodology that lets you assess that.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that almost every project that you start in a company or an organization in this day and age becomes an IT project, okay? And when you get into the world of IT, having all the different offices around the world use the same piece of software in a standardized way does make life a lot easier in the IT world, and there is savings there. When every office has a unique piece of software, it's a nightmare. And so there is a real savings from the systems point of view. Of course, the challenge is to get to that position, people who are using their own homemade system will work against you everywhere.
But they'll also, you sound like a guy who tried to push through a system globally. But on the other side, people have local customized, and the generic one that's good for everyone won't necessarily be perfect for me in my situation. So there's this trade-off.
That's a debate, yeah.
But I noticed that the question really asked about the impact. And so one way you could do this, if you had multiple companies, you could compare and contrast. They centralized, this other company did not, and then you can compare and contrast. That's very hard data to find. So while an interesting topic, I don't know how good it would be as a thesis.
Well, we have a lot of examples. What happens, it's interesting, is when companies start having financial hard times, they tend to rein in the many organizations that have sprung up during good times and the different offices, and they will centralize. They'll bring supply chain facilities, they'll reduce them and get down to one large facility and one centralized. So there's a number of examples of that. So there's literature out there that talks about people talking about how they brought things back to one central system, and they liked it a lot. So
yeah. So another one, a transformation of supply chain strategy approach with respect to changing company size. Not a question. So you need to think about how you would, the reason why I'm making you guys go into a question, because then it naturally falls into how would I answer the question? So it leads to a methodology. If you just make a statement, then it's hard to think about how you're going to apply a methodology to answer something. So if you say, supply chain segmentation, it's like, okay, what does that mean? But if you say, does segmentation strategy improve level of performance in the paper industry? Then I can answer that question, because it kind of leads to a methodology. That's why I'm making you do it in the form of a question. It's not because I'm a fan of Jeopardy. So for the transformation of supply chain, it could be a question, might be, how does the size of the company impact the ability of them to transform their supply chain strategy? I don't know, it's kind of squishy.
Yeah, it is squishy. Another type of project that our students usually don't like and don't do a good job of are what I call them headquarters projects, where the people who are at headquarters, oftentimes you have a large corporation that has many divisions, and you'll have a small group at headquarters that's a center of excellence or something, right? And they'll be asking questions like, how do I invent a set of metrics to measure the performance of all these different divisions, or how should the organizational structure be set up? These are squishy projects that are headquarters folks, and they don't lend themselves to quantitative analysis. They don't lend themselves to collecting data and building a model. And I try to get our students to stay away from those.
Someone asked the question, is it required to have a company sponsor for the research project, or can we use data from some other source, transportation, origin, destination data? Yeah, there's government data, so you could do some really interesting work. We had some students do thesis work on logistics clusters, and they used actually publicly available data, census data and some Department of Transportation data. So sure, it can be done if it answers your question. And so the data should follow the question, not the other way around. It shouldn't be, I've got this data set, what questions can I ask? It's kind of, what's this question and what data do I need to support that? But yeah, sure, you don't need the company private sector. It can be government or any kind of data source. Another question, I work in a giant paper maker. I focus on finance, so trade finance is one of my key functions. Can I link supply chain and finance all together in order to make the whole supply chain more efficient or effective? Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, in the course I teach, we have a couple of lectures on trade finance and how it's used and some of the clever ways it's used and more innovative ways it's used. So it's a great topic. Not too many of our students do anything in that space. I'd love to see more of it done.
Yep. So some other ones. How do I optimize my supply and inventory costs as well as reduce inpatient admissions to minimize waste in my emergency room department, considering high variability of patients coming into the emergency room? Awesome. So we did a project with, gosh, who was it with? Boston Scientific a number of years ago that make medical devices. And we actually tried to look at this because, it was Cardinal Health, because they have the Pyxis machines. And so this would be a great one. I could see doing this as a simulation where you have different policies. For example, the inventory. How much of different materials do I need? How many doctors do I have? I see a pure simulation there. You could do. It could be kind of fun. You could also do a regression with that.
What's interesting is the waiting time in an emergency room. My mother lives in Florida, and as you drive up I-95, there are gigantic billboards on the side of the road that say,
The wait time.
Our hospital wait time 3 minutes, and then it changes, it updates.
It's not just Florida.
It's very
New Hampshire has it too. I'm driving down, I see this. It's like you're going to make the decision on the
That's
road.
right.
Oh, 6 minutes, 10 minutes. Oh, let me go there.
When
Am I bleeding?
When I crash, I'll tell the doctor, hey, why don't you
That's crazy. So that's great. It's a question, and you can see a path to how you would answer it. Another question: how much impact on supply chains will happen due to the disruption in the South China Sea? So that's an interesting one. So you could do that in a bunch of different ways. You had students do this with your high-vis project.
Yeah, the South China Sea is very interesting going on right now, and I can see a number of models that say if access is denied for shipping lanes, what does that do to the cost? What does that do to the flow of goods? It's a real touchy subject right now, and the potential for trade disruption is significant. You don't hear as much about it in the press, but it's a tough issue.
Yeah, and so you could look at that and see how would you solve that? How would you approach that? Interviews?
If you didn't, yeah. So what you do, I can see someone putting together a model that shows the current flows from port to port, right?
Right.
And how much of that goes through the South China Sea, how much of that doesn't, and so forth. And then if you cut off access to certain ports or certain choke points through the system, where would the ships have to go, and what ports does that put at a big disadvantage if they have to go around something? I can see alternative scenarios around different shipping patterns coming out of that, and what the cost would be and the cycle time changes that would happen.
That would be a good one. Another project. Which SKUs can be statistically forecastable based on large historical data automatically? And so the person wrote a detail that their current company, they have thousands of SKUs that are forecasts are made manually. I could see this as being, if you get the data, this would be awesome, because then you could test it. And you could go through and use forecasting techniques and see maybe identify the types of products through segmentation that are amenable to certain statistical forecasting. Sure, I think that's doable.
Yeah, it's a classic, and of course the slow movers, all of the things that we teach in the classroom break down when you get a slow enough mover, and then how do you forecast slow movers? So this is a relevant question.
Yep. How can the inflow of end-of-life products be forecasted? What incentive systems are there for customers to put in place to influence or better forecast this flow? Yeah, this is something we haven't done much on. I know Don Rosenfield did some stuff of this way back in the 80s. Where you look at end of life. And so there's two things you could look at. How do you start predicting end of life for forecasting, right? Because then you don't want to overproduce a product that is going to be gone. But then the other is, how do you manage that going out? I can see that happening.
Yeah, I'm actually advising a student from another program that's doing an end of life for a company that builds, after the main company gets done building a product, they often subcontract the rest of its life to another contractor, and then their question is, how much of this do I build in advance, and so forth. Good question.
Question about the methodology, not a research question itself. Most companies are very guarded with their data. How do students or researchers convince companies to share data suitable for quantitative analysis? We do it very carefully. So essentially, here's the thing. The company is very concerned that the cost or what they spent on an item was X, or that they spent so much on transportation or whatever. They care about the exact numbers. For your research, you don't care. You care more about orders of magnitude. So remember what you're doing, the difference between consulting and research. Consulting, I want to know the exact answer. For research, I want an insight and a model that is generalizable and can be used elsewhere. So what typically happens is we disguise the data. You might multiply everything by 0.9, a random function. You might never display the actual data itself because all that you care about are the insights that come out of it, not the data itself. So there are ways to do it. Now, having said that, some companies are more restrictive than others.
Yeah, and so we obviously negotiate non-disclosure agreements with every company that we work with, and they are more or less nervous about giving us data, and so we have to work through and talk through that with every project that we do. But having said that, we do get the data for the projects, and the companies get a chance to review all the projects that we do. Before we publish anything, they have actually 30 days to look at what we're proposing to put out there and come back and say, hey, we think this is giving away confidential information, and we'll change it. So they have a right of sort of to review it.
General question, why don't we provide an online option to complete a master's in supply chain management? Because we don't. And we won't. MIT does not provide degrees totally online. They won't. They don't. We won't. Okay, next question. Literature review, how to discover the state of the art about my research? Lots of places. My gosh, when I was going through school, Evo, when you and Bruce, we had to go to the library and look up in journals and do this stuff. Yep. You guys have it so easy today. Google Scholar is a good place to start. My opinion is Wikipedia is a great place to start and a horrible place to finish, right? Start there, and then you can start going deeper and deeper. When you come to MIT, you'll have access to a lot of research journals that are peer-reviewed. Now, for a project like this, yeah, some of it will be relevant, but not as much as you think. So I'd say a good place to start is on Google Scholar to start looking in, and you can explore. And the best thing to do is you find a paper that you think is relevant, you read it, then you look and see who they referenced, and you start following that. Or you follow the authors. So we'll teach you some of these techniques as you go further, because it's very important that you, all research, you stand on someone else's shoulders. It's like peeling an onion. You're building on other things that were done. Especially for a dissertation, you don't want to recreate something that's already been done. That's a kiss of death. And that's why you do your review up front, so you don't discover right before you're supposed to graduate. But we'll help you with that. But generally, Google Scholar is a good place to start. So someone asked a question. So you have a great idea, and MIT, which I assume when people say MIT, they mean us, because we are not all meet in a dark room and decide things collectively. So someone at MIT conceptually likes it, but it's enormous and impossible. Then I wouldn't have approved it. That's kind of a stupid statement. So when people come in with a thesis idea, if it's to boil the ocean, that's a criteria by which it's not a good thesis. So if you come in and your thesis idea is world peace, that's awesome. Not a thesis, because it won't be done. So part of the criteria of what is a good thesis project, or a research project rather, is can it be done? Can it be answered? Can it be answered with the resources you have and the time that you have? Not boiling the ocean.
Yeah, and so like I mentioned, I spend most of my summer talking to companies about what research projects our students are going to work on for the next year, right? And all the projects start out huge, and it's okay. I'm used to that, right? And part of my project, part of my role, and you'll have to do the same thing, is to try to make the project small enough that you can actually get done and graduate. And so that happens on every project. And there's also scope creep on every project. As you get into the project, they want to make it bigger and bigger, and you have to keep it smaller and smaller. So this tension goes on the whole time. It's a natural part of it, but you got to do it.
So let's say you have we've had this a lot. Let's say you have a project where you're trying to understand what's the best distribution method for a certain distribution center out, and whether it uses direct store, multi-stop, whatever. So you have a methodology that kind of takes care of that. For a consulting project, I'd have to do all 72 DCs and give them a solution. For a research project, pick one. So the part of the scope that Bruce is talking about, you can narrow it down by geography, by products, by customers. Because remember, what you're trying to do is come up with an approach and insights, not a solution for every possible one. So you don't need to solve all 72. So when we talk about scope reduction, we're not trying to make your problem less important. We're trying to have you focus on the right thing. Focus on the relevant piece, get an insight, and then someone else can apply it to other areas. That's kind of the approach. Blended program question. General, what career opportunities are available after completion? Will it be considered on the same level as a full-time program? We've addressed this elsewhere. But just as a short summary, career development cannot be handled in a 10-month program the same way as in a 5-month program because you have 5 less months. So if you really want to get career development, coaching, things like that, you should come to the 10-month program because then we can spend the time, get you focused on it. For the 5-month program, you're really focused, you know where you want to go, and your career should already be moving forward. So we will not be able to spend much time on career development. We will help with placement as much as we can, but it is not the main focus of the blended, fast-track 5-month program. But the other thing that makes it harder in that 5-month program is by government regulations in the United States, we do not give optional practical training. OPT is not granted for a program less than
1 year.
1 year, the 10 months, because the 10-month program qualifies.
Yeah, the other thing to keep in mind, in North America, companies recruit college students in September, October, and November. Right now in Europe, they do it in the spring, but in here, so our blended folks are going to come here in January and they're going to leave in the beginning of June. They will have missed the main recruiting season for the company. So if you're coming because you want to get that wonderful, huge job, the residential program does a very good job of that. The blended program, you'd have to work be on your own mainly and working very hard to get the job. It's possible, but it's not the same as the 10-month.
So I know we're running out of time, but I have some good questions. I'm going to do them rapid fire. Okay.
Go for it.
So here's a question: how do we decide the optimum volume for liquid carrying road oil containers for different speed limits, considering vehicle operating costs? I think that'd be awesome. That's a straight optimization project if you had the data, because this is the difference between do I go by truck, do I go by rail, how to do that. It's a small scaled one, but I think that would work. Do you agree?
Yeah, and there's more and more stuff going by rail now.
Yeah. As pipelines get disapproved.
Yeah.
What will be the impact of the new Silk Road on ports in the Middle East and Africa?
It's a wonderful question. Excellent. Looking forward to having folks work on that.
Yeah. I was actually in Kazakhstan a couple years ago, and they're all about that. It's 1% of the population works for the Kazakhstan Railroad. If anyone from Kazakhstan's on the call, it's amazing. It's amazing. What's the cost benefit of having a shuttle of ships that service the various New York, Jersey ports from a larger ship coming through the Panama Canal?
Right. So having a hub and spoke network instead of what we have today, where the ships call at all the ports, and you would have feeder ships going from a hub to spokes. That's something that may happen as you know the expanded Panama Canal goes forward here.
Okay. How can a digital out-of-home advertisement optimize its supply chain, considering installation, production, delivery, and service, in order to optimize its profit? Bruce?
Well, that's one we'll have to scope down a little bit more.
Yeah.
And get more specific information.
Yeah, because you have to figure out how you would answer this.
Yeah.
What approach? So you think about the tools you have in your tool belt now. You have optimization, a bunch of different models there, simulation, you have regression, you have some interviews, survey analysis. So you always have to think, okay, which tool would I use to answer one of these research questions?
Yeah.
This one's that's tough.
That's tough.
Yeah, we'd have to boil that one a little longer on the back of the stove. What's the hard financial impact of a robust, effective S&OP process? Well, it's mythical because I don't know any robust, effective S&OP processes personally, but I don't know how you'd measure that.
That's
what do you
tough.
think?
Well, so I think what you do is you'd find, and I've had a few clients when I was in consulting that had outstanding SLP process, and they would tell you all the benefits from it. I would start with trying to find an excellent one, but it'd be mainly more of a qualitative than a quantitative project to think about. It speeds up the decision-making process a lot. Allows you to make decisions much earlier. Things that you should be planning in advance, you can make the decision many more months ahead of time, give yourself more chance to plan things. How do you put a quantitative number on that?
Yeah,
That's the project.
That's
the project.
How does a company, I'm going to paraphrase this, how does a company know when to expand from one operational facility to multiple satellite sites, and where should those sites be located? So kind of idea on a growth path, when should I start centralizing out? I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
You could simulate that. You could do an optimization with different levels.
That's a network modeling problem with different forecasts.
Yep, that's a good one. Someone asked if I partner with a company and I have the data and they're okay with it, do I have to identify them by name? No. And so when you go through the projects, you'll see a lot of Shopco and Big Company and Pharmaco.
Yeah.
And so, no, you don't have to identify them by
And
name.
they probably don't want you or won't let you identify them. But that's what we experience.
What is the best method or model to schedule transportation of sugarcane to sugar mills in order to minimize cost and sucrose loss?
Great project.
I know nothing about sugarcane.
But you have to find a company that's going to work with you and give you the insights and some information on that.
My guess is they work for a company, a sugarcane company. I'm
that's-
guessing if that's the case, awesome. The best data comes from someone internal, because think about it. If I'm doing a project and someone hands me data, if I don't have the context, I have a whole nother learning curve. If I know the people, I know where to go. I strongly, strongly, strongly urge you guys, do projects based on companies you know or are currently working with. It makes life so much easier. And I think there's a lot more, but I think we're going to cut it off there. We'll do one more. How do we strike a balance between spare parts requirements, production requirements, in-plant inventory, and minimum order quantity from vendors? That's an ocean. And so I could see,
There's a lot of parts to that. Yeah,
I could see winnowing that
the
down.
stocking strategy, sourcing and stocking strategy for spare parts. It's a tough one because spare parts are extremely slow moving. Many of them are very expensive, and you don't want to invest a ton of money. And so it's a tough question.
Yeah. All right, last question. Is it required to have a company sponsor for the research project? No. You just need to have data. It's easier. I won't lie, it's a lot easier. But for my dissertation, I didn't have a company sponsor. I had data from different sources. But it's doable. All right, that's we're going to cut it off there. Thanks, this was great. So hopefully you're getting a sense of it. And when you ask yourself, is this a good research project? Think about it from the perspective we gave you. Put it in the form of a question and think, okay, now how would I answer this? What technique, what methodology, what approach would I do to try to convince someone that I have the right answer? So we'll be doing another hangout on this topic again in 6 hours. Is that right? 4 p.m. Eastern time. And what is that UTC?
2100.
2100 UTC. So if you're a glutton for punishment, you can come back and you can hear it all over again. All right. Thanks, guys.